Hello everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel. I'm so excited to be sharing this video with you today because this is my very first official beginning to end edited video featuring my very first release. So I'm going to be using a bunch of products today, but mainly the Merry Trees bundle of stamps, dies, and a stencil set. So I'm starting out with the stencils. I just showed you that they've got numbers next to them. You'll see how I use those as I move through this card design. Before I get to the actual stencils, I'm going to do some ink blending on my card base. This is the actual folded card base. This is nearly a one-layer card. I'm going to be gluing some other die cuts and things on top, and I've got a couple of things popped up, or I think just one thing popped up on foam tape. But for the most part, this is a very easy to mail card. Started out with parsley ink, kind of blending that up from the bottom. Then I added a little bit of evergreen just to intensify that green at the edges. Okay, so here I am using this stencil. I'm going to use that top line, which is labeled 1. It just so happens that it's the perfect positioning when you center your card base underneath the stencil. So I'm using a little bit of Easy C tape just to hold the stencil in place, and I'll reuse that for the other stencils, or I should say just the other stencil. There's only 2. Starting out with the color Poppy, and I'm very lightly ink blending onto the 3 trees that are cut out of this section of the stencil. You want to make sure you don't have super juicy ink pads for this, because I think it's really easy to get like ink pooling at the corners on the stencil. So if you have a little bit of a more juicy ink pad, make sure you kind of wipe off your brush before you bring it to the stencil. So now I'm moving the stencil up and going to that second line of trees, which is labeled with the number 2. It's etched on the stencil. And there's also the etchings of the other trees in the design, even the ones that aren't cut out. And that's so that you can line them up with, what you've already ink blended. So it's not only for lining them up for, later colors of ink, but also so you can get that line of trees perfectly positioned on your design. So I moved on to evergreen, and then now I'm going to switch to a different color. I believe this next color I'm using is parsley. And let's see, is it? Yes, it's parsley. I couldn't remember there for a moment. So I'm going to kind of lean off my brush a little bit and then come in with some parsley. So there's actually the opportunity for 4 different colors on this line of trees. And the reason why you want to make sure that your line of trees is always lined up, with the etched design, is because if you do everything perfectly, the line of the stencil trees will match the dies as well. So you have the opportunity to stamp the line of trees from the Merry Tree stamp set. You'll see that in a moment. Or you can stencil on your trees and then cut them out. So this last color is Poppy. I basically used 2 colors of red and 2 colors of green in order to get this line of trees. So there's my trees. I think they look so super cute. I'm going to kind of clean this up a little bit, clean up my work area, and then I'm going to move on to the major portion of the greeting. So I've got some Poppy cardstock here. I'm prepping it with an anti-static powder tool and then stamping the large Merry from the Merry Tree stamp set in white pigment ink. This is white pigment ink from Simon Says Stamp. And while I've got this stamp in my MISTI, I'm actually going to stamp this a couple of times, or 3 times, for 3 of the cards in today's video. And I already had these cards planned out a little bit. I'd sketched them out. I knew what I wanted to create. So since I had this stamp in my MISTI, I decided to just do them all at the same time. So I'm adding some white embossing powder. This is Alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. Hitting that with the heat tool until it was smooth and melted. And then I'm actually going to set that aside and do the other ones. So I stamped this on eucalyptus cardstock as well. Use the same ink and the same embossing powder. And then this third version, I'm using Poppy ink, and I'm stamping that onto ballet slipper cardstock. So this one is not embossed, it's just stamped. And then I'm taking the Merry die from the die set, and you can just position that kind of centered right over the words. And just, try to get it as centered as possible. And then you should be able to cut this out with your die cutting machine, no problem. So I ran that through, and now I've got all of my pink letters. They cut out like a dream, and they're centered just perfectly. I did the same thing for the eucalyptus version. They pop out of those dies really easily. And then I'm going to die cut the red version as well. And I really love this idea of having, you can just almost, what's the word, like assembly line style, complete a bunch of these die cut words. I think you could do a bunch of cards like duplicates really easily with that. For the sub greeting, or the continuation of my greeting on my first card, I decided to use evergreen cardstock, and I first stamped this line of text in white pigment ink, and it didn't look quite as sharp as I would have hoped. The stamping was just a little bit blurry, and I think that's because I really smushed my ink pad on my stamp. So I cleaned off the stamp, tapped lightly, and you can see how much more crisp the second stamping is. So even though I am coating both of the lines of text in the white embossing powder, I really am only going to use one of them. So I just hit that with my heat tool, and then I used the long rectangle die from the die set to cut out this line of text. That die is sized perfectly to cut this out. So, and it's actually much longer than you actually need for the sentiments, so you do cut it down. So I matched the tilt of the font on this greeting and just cut it at a diagonal on both ends. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my card, and I'm using the negative cut area from that Mary to help me position these words just right. So I'm using some removable tape, that same EZC tape, to hold it on my card while I glue my Mary die cut letters directly down to my card front. You could always pop these up with a little bit of foam tape if you like, but I wanted to keep this area pretty flat so that I could have that green other line of text be popped up. So I'm just holding the letters down really carefully while I lift up that cardstock, and then everything is positioned just right. After I had that glued on, I immediately put a heavy weight on it. This is just a paperweight to hold that down. Then I decided to add a little bit of decoration onto the tree, so I prepped that area with an anti-static powder tool. And then I stamped the kind of like 4 separated decorations that line up with the trees. So they line up from the third tree over from there, and I stamped those in that same white pigment ink. And this is going to allow me to add some embossing powder on top and get a nice bright white design on top of the trees. So you can use the decoration stamp on the stenciled trees or stamped trees, either one. I added that alabaster embossing powder and wiped off any of the powder that was sticking around in areas with a dry brush, and then used my heat tool to melt all the embossing powder. To finish off this card, I just put some foam tape on the back of that greeting that I cut out, and then put that directly over the Mary. So that is the first card all finished. I love that one. It turned out so cute. I'm on to the second card, and I actually have a 5x7 white card base in my MISTI, and I'm stamping this diagonal stripe stamp. This is actually a stamp from the Mary Greetings Builder stamp set. So it's not a stamp set that I'm really featuring today, but it is in the release. And I stamped that kind of green striped area, and then I started to position where I wanted the trees. I ended up wanting them just a little bit higher than what you just saw, and that's going to allow the cutout letters to go in between the line of trees and this striped line. So I started out with parsley, and I inked up the top half of the trees. Then I took my green blending brush and I just softened that line of ink. I'm going to transition this from parsley ink to evergreen ink so that I have a little bit of a gradient on the line of trees. So I first stamped that, and I think it actually looks kind of cool like that, with a little bit of that green fading to the bottom. I think it would look really cool just left like that. But I wanted to intensify the colors quite a bit, so I stamped this area again, inked that up with parsley, and this time I brought the ink down a little bit more and still used that blending brush to take off a little bit of that ink and soften the edge. So here we are. This looks even better this second time around, I think, just intensifying that color. Now I'm going to switch to evergreen ink, and I'm going to ink up the bottom of the trees this time, just the bottom half of the trees. And then I'll take my same green blending brush and I'm going to blend from the top just to take off some of that dark green ink off the top of the trees. So now when I stamp this down, it's going to have a dark area at the bottom of the line of trees, and it will transition up to a little bit of a lighter green. I think that turned out really, really cool. I love this technique with these images. So now I'm going to prep a couple of sub greetings to go on my card. I've got some poppy cardstock here. And remembering what I learned on the first time around, I was very light-handed when I applied my white pigment ink. And then I sprinkled on some of that white embossing powder after I stamped. So once again, this is Alabaster embossing powder from Brutus Monroe. Hit that with my heat tool until all of the powder was melted. And then I used that same long rectangle die to cut out both of these lines of text. So I put some foam tape on the back of my letters. I used these very narrow foam strips from Waffle Flower. And then I kind of eyeballed it as I adhered the letters onto my card front. I wanted them to be a little bit more playful this time, not in such a straight line. So I kind of bumped them up and down and had them kind of look like they're dancing a little bit. I then cut my greetings like I did before and at a little bit of an angle. And I wanted these to kind of bleed off the left and right sides of the card. So I cut those long sentiment strips so that they end on the edge of each card and kind of overhang the card design. So I put a little bit of glue on the right-hand side of that greeting, and then I put foam tape on the other, just so it was on the same level as the Mary letters. I then took the little tiny star from this Mary Tree stamp set, and I decided to just freeform stamp some of these little stars up there. I thought it was really cute. I just wanted a little pop of red up at the top of the card, just to bring in a little bit more of that color. Then I grabbed my white gel pen and I just added some really simple dots onto these trees just to break up some of that solid color of green. And that's going to finish my second card. I love how this one turned out. It's so cute and playful. Red, green, white with a little bit of that pink thrown in. For my third card, I'm actually going to be using a set of dies from the release. This is the Winter Berries Stem Layering Die Set, and I've cut out all of the interior pieces of the design out of some red glitter cardstock from Simon, and then I also cut out 2 shades of green out of that same design. I've got Parsley cardstock and Evergreen. I cut out the main design out of white cardstock and also the base layer. So I'm adhering those 2 together, and then I can start puzzle piecing all of the colored elements into my berry design here. So as I was thinking about putting these berries on here, I thought, you know what, I kind of want 2 different colors of red, but I'd cut them out of glitter cardstock. So I decided that I would use an alcohol marker to color 4 of the berries just to darken them up so they look like a very dark red color instead of just that bright red. So I actually put a line of temporary adhesive or removable adhesive on this cardstock, and then I just moved my glitter berries down there. And now I'm going to be using a Copic marker. I'm using the color E79, and I'm just pouncing my marker on top of that glitter paper. I'm pouncing because the glitter is kind of rough and I don't want it to fray or affect the tip of my marker. So I'm just inking that up a little bit, and that just gives it kind of a more dark red look. Decided to use brown instead of a darker red. And then I added some dots of glue to 4 different berries on my design, and then puzzle pieced those darker red glitter berries directly on there. I think this can go really quickly if you have all of your die cuts spread out and ready to go. You know, you just put the dots of glue and then you can pick up those little tiny intricate colored areas and transfer them over to your design. Once you get going, this inlay die cutting works really quickly. I did the same thing with the leaf areas. Put some glue down for the parsley areas and then added more glue to the larger areas for the evergreen die cut pieces. So I'm just going to bring those over puzzle piece them in, and then I'm going to put a paperweight on top of this while everything dries. Okay, I'm going to do a little more die cutting to put this whole card together. So I'm using the Gift Bows dies from the release. I thought it'd be really fun to kind of have some strings coming in on the card and have it kind of intersect with the letters and also the berries. I thought that'd be a nice kind of overlapping layering look. So I split the word Mary into 2 lines to have it fit on a tall card. This is an A2 card, but I wanted it to be portrait. And then I glued the berries down. Now, if I was to make this card again, I would have put the vertical string that I'm going to adhere in a minute. I would have adhered those 2 together at the same time so that I could have that vertical string kind of weaving in and out of the berries. I didn't think too far ahead, and I ended up having to cut that string into a smaller section and sliding it under the berries, and then adhering the bottom portion coming out from, have overlap the leaves on the berries. But I think it probably would have been a little bit easier to do this at the same time, just adhere the berry die cut and this string at the same time instead of having to cut it apart. Then I put the horizontal string going right across my card, and then that bow came up and it kind of hid that area where the vertical string was missing because I couldn't, put it through the berries. It worked out in the end, but I think if I was to do this card again, I would have just, adhered the string and the berries at the same time. Then put some foam adhesive on the back of a sub-sentiment that I cut out. I stamped and did the heat embossing and then cut it out like you've seen on the 2 previous cards. So this finishes up my 3rd card. There is this 4th card here that for whatever reason I didn't have my camera on, but I did want to show you the card. It was really easy to create. I used a lot of the same cardstocks I've previously shown, but I also added some red glitter trees and gold trees, and I just used the long die with all the trees from the die set. And then I arranged all of the trees on the card and I glued them down. Some are glued and some are actually on foam strips. Some are popped up just a little bit. So here are those first 3 cards. I think they turned out so cute. This was a really fun way to kind of highlight the Merry Trees bundle. If you haven't checked out my very first release over at concordand9th.com, I hope you'll hop over there to their shop and take a look at everything. My previous video on Monday that I posted was a walkthrough of the entire collection, so I hope you'll take a look at that as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be deep into the holiday cards starting right now. I think I'll have a few other types of cards kind of mixed in here, but we're going to be deep into the holiday card season for the next little bit. And as card makers, we totally understand that, because if you have a lot of holiday cards to send, you got to start early. Thanks for joining me today. I'll be back with another video very soon. Thanks for watching.